supposedly the most progressive, Chewy. Chewy's leading campaign is advocating for 1,000 more cops. This is already within a country within a city where we lead the country in having cops per 100,000 people. We don't need more cops in Chicago. We need less cops. What we need is for all of the murder cases that are involved with police killings to be reopened and publicly investigated. What we need are the public records that IPRA has been holding. That IPRA has been holding Dakota Bright's case without providing any answers to Pansy, his mother, and to all of the people who have been affected by his death. We need the names of the cops who killed Deshaun Pittman and Rashad McIntosh. We need Rekia Boyd's killer, Dante Servin, prosecuted to the full extent of the law as it is currently written. Rekia Boyd's trial will begin on April 9th. And we should be there. We should be there rallying and marching and supporting Rekia Boyd's family while the trial goes on. I am an abolitionist. In that, what I mean is I'm for the abolition of the police. I'm for the abolition of mass incarceration. I'm for the abolition of the police system, and I'm for the abolition of this system, capitalism. But I want to make a distinction. I am for prosecuting killer cops and jailing them to the full extent of the law as it is currently written. And I do not see that as being in conflict. I am for holding this system accountable to the laws that it has executed onto itself. I see a critical distinction between bourgeois power and people power. And conflating the two under the guise of abolition does us no service, but does, in my opinion, further provide impunity to a system in which they have designed to oppress and subjugate Black people, working people, and all marginalized people in this country. Police are killing us with impunity. Today, February 21st, in the year 2015, Malcolm's words and wisdom ring ever more true as we gather here today. We will hear from Pansy Bright today in remembering her beloved son, and then we will hear from John Hawkins on the legacy of Malcolm X, and then we will hear from Mike Saviwe Elliott on CPAC and the striking workers in Whiting, Indiana. I always want to say Whiting, Illinois. And we will then discuss how all of these things are linked together with the fight that Malcolm advocated for and our fight to make Black lives matter in this country. Over in the back, we have card-making table where we ask that you join in creating a card for Pansy Bright and for Dakota Bright's family in remembrance of his son. And we ask that you also complete postcards that are in support of the reparations ordinance that is currently awaiting a hearing in the Chicago City Council. The reparations ordinance would allow for financial, therapeutic, and educational resources for those who have been tortured by Chicago PD, most infamously under the John Birch torture ring that began in 1972. If you guys have been reading the paper, you will remember that as part of John Birch's torture ring, these torturers, some of them, one of whom specifically has been highlighted, was transferred over to Guantanamo to continue the torturing that he learned under John Birch there. So there's a direct link between what is happening internationally and what is happening locally here. So with no further ado, I would like to bring to you Pansy Bright, the mother of young Dakota Bright.
Hi, everybody. My name name is Pansy Edwards, the mother of 15-year-old Dakota Bright. He was killed 2 years ago, November 8th, 2012. Chased down by Chicago police. They shot him in the back of his head. They said he had a gun. There was no gun found by his body. They handcuffed him after they shot him. There was a picture taken by the gentleman who lives in the building. At first they said that he had a gun, but then when the gentleman took the picture and we see that there's no gun around his body, now that they're just saying there was a gun found somewhere else. But you shot him and killed him because you said he had a gun, but there's no gun. So you hunted him down and you murdered him, you know, at 15 years old, and then you tell a story of this 20-year-old known gang member, but he was a 15-year-old child. He was my baby, and he was left laying in the backyard for 5 hours when they flagged the ambulance off, wouldn't let the ambulance come. They probably could have saved his life. They probably could have did anything, but they flagged him off. They let him lay there and die. I was told that I was able to get a police report several times, that I had to go to 35th, and every time I went to 35th, they would tell me, no, you have to contact this person, you have to contact this person, you have to contact this person. So November 8th of 2014 made 2 years, and I'm still getting the runarounds about a police report. Same thing going on with the death certificate. Me and William Holloway has been down there twice. In October of 2014 and November of 2014, and they gave me the runaround again about the police report and the autopsy, because they trying to cover something up. Because I see a lot of people that's passing away and they getting the death certificates and everything. I got the death certificate for my son, and the only thing it says on my son's death certificate is shot, you know, and homicide. Like, I mean, they not going into description or anything, and I've never seen anything like that. I just want answers for me, his father, his sister, his brother, and his nephew. We out here, you know, we fighting for justice that it seems like we'll never get. Only thing they keep saying is it's still an open case. He was shot in the back of his head. How long does it take to investigate? Was it a gun here? Was he shot in the front of him? Was he shot in the side on the side of him? No, he was shot in the back of his head, and I have a picture clearly. He's laying there on his stomach, handcuffed, laying there shot. How much investigating do you need to do? It's been 2 years. And like what you were saying with the election, I wouldn't vote for neither. I'm going to write in William Calloway because he is for us. And the police, we need somebody that's going to help fight with us against the police. He's not on the ballot, but I'm going to write him in for the mayor of Chicago.
Thank you, Pansy. Now we'll hear from John Hawkins on the legacy of Malcolm X.
I'd like to use the podium if at all possible.
Yeah.
Can we move the computer a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just close it.
Okay. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the Socialist Workers' Party, revolutionary party that has been active in the workers' movement, in the fight to defend black rights since 1928. And my views are the views of the party and the shared views. I think it's important to say that the elections coming up aren't going to change anything for working people in Chicago. And Pansy Edwards' decision not to vote for the Democrats or Republicans candidates is exactly what Malcolm X would advocate that you do in this election. There's another candidate that you can write in besides William Calloway. That's the candidate of the Socialist Workers' Party, Dan Fine. Dan Fine doesn't go around saying, I'm running for mayor, I'm Dan Fine. He says, I am the candidate of a party, the Socialist Workers' Party, a revolutionary party that fights day in and day out to make changes that will benefit working people immediately, to fight to raise the minimum wage, to fight to prosecute killer cops, to fight to win the immediate release of the 100 black men who are still in jail, who were tortured by John Burge, which means they were framed up and unjustly convicted and deserve to be out. That's the kind of party we are. And that's what Dan Fine says, you can get some literature on his campaign. So if you don't want to waste your vote, my suggestion would be to write in Dan Fine. If you want to be really bold about it, write in Dan Fine Socialist Workers Party. It's not going to make a difference. Just write it in. And don't vote for the Democrats. Don't vote for the Republicans. Because if you do, you're voting for your enemy. You're voting for one of the representatives of one of the two parties that administers the capitalist state against working people, against black people, against Mexican Americans, against Asians, against women, against working people in all of our forms. You see, that's what they do. So that's why I would suggest you do about the elections. That's what Malcolm would suggest too. Some of you may have, I think I saw on the Black Lives Matter website, I checked it out before the meeting. People in Black Lives Matter saw it this morning in the New York Times. That is the op-ed piece that Malcolm's daughter did on what Malcolm would be doing today. And it's a very interesting piece. I agree with a lot of what it says, and I disagree with one point that she makes, but we'll get into that later. Malcolm's ideas, in my opinion, are more relevant today than ever. We're living through a period of economic crisis in the entire world, and it's having an impact on the working class as a whole, and on blacks and other oppressed nationalities especially. But we're also living through something else, that is a beginning upsurge in resistance to this, and it's beginning to have an impact. What we saw, the sustained mobilizations in Ferguson, Missouri, and in Staten Island, and the breadth, the spread of those mobilizations around the country indicate that something new is happening amongst working people, especially working people of color. What we're seeing in the strike, for the first time in 30 years, oil workers are on strike. Big, huge strike involving 5,000 workers all across the country and right here in Whiting, is a reflection of the same thing. It's a reflection of the same thing. In a pamphlet called The Working Class and the Transformation of Learning, the Fraud of Education Reform into Capitalism, the National Secretary of my party, Jack Barnes, wrote that compare the number of people killed on the streets by cops, the number of people, he was talking about the death penalty, the number of people who died from the death penalty in the United States. The number of people, they don't keep figures on the number of people that cops kill in the United States. They don't. But we all know that figure is much larger than the number of people who die from being executed. No. But an even greater figure is the number of workers who die on the job from preventable accidents. And that's another form of murder by the capitalist class. And that's all it is, another form of murder by the capitalist class. They all are related because they profit. These people die on the job because of the drive for profit. Young black children, get killed on the streets to defend the profit system. People are sent to death to defend the profit system in the gas chambers and electric chairs. That's what it's all about. So these are very definitely connected. Working class fighters can draw on Malcolm's legacy to inform our fights and to give us a guide as to how to struggle most effectively. First and foremost, Malcolm X was an intransigent opponent of racist discrimination and degradation in the United States, what he called Americanism in any guise. He was opposed to any subordination of this struggle to the government in Washington or to its political parties, to any kind of compromise with imperialist oppression of the toilers in the semi-colonial world. This put him on a revolutionary, internationalist, and anti-imperialist political course. While he was developing these ideas in the Nation of Islam, while he was a member there, it took a break with the Nation of Islam for these ideas to become fully political. And he refused to retreat from this course. His refusal to retreat from this course culminated in his being silenced by Elijah Muhammad in late 1963 for remarks he made in relationship to the assassination of Kennedy, and prepared his public break with the Nation of Islam in early 1964. As the imperialist intention to silence him forever became more and more clear, Malcolm's political integrity and consistency led him to rapidly break through barrier after barrier at the end of 1964 to the beginning of 1965, and to explain the process he was going through publicly as it occurred. While he was a member of the Nation of Islam, Malcolm rejected the whole idea of so-called interracial marriage. Now, there's no such thing as there's only one human race. But he rejected it, marriage between Africans and Caucasians and Africans and Asians and things like that. But he dropped this reactionary demagogy and anti-materialist idea once he broke with the nation. It was part of him becoming a citizen of the world and a revolutionary leader of international stature for working people around the world. It was part of that he dropped that. He also dropped anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, which was part and parcel of the ideology of the Nation of Islam then and is today. Just read what the Nation of Islam publishes, and that's part of this ideology, unabashedly so. That is a problem. But Malcolm rejected that. He saw that scapegoating Jews, blaming the problems that working people, that black people confront on Jews, a Jewish conspiracy, was nothing but a trick to get us to look at Jews as the enemy instead of the real enemy, which is the wealthy, Protestant, mostly Caucasian, mostly white, capitalist class in the United States. That's who's the real problem. They own the bulk of the banks, industries, mines, everything else, and they were the ones who used to own our ancestors, as chattel property. Those of us who are black, right? Malcolm rejected that. Malcolm rejected the cult of corruption and the practice of corruption that was part of the Elijah Muhammad regime in the nation. He exposed it, he rejected it. And he exposed the inevitable corruption that comes from searching for alliances with right-wingers, like the Nazi Party and things like that, which the nation did while he was a member of it. By taking these positions and acting along these lines, Malcolm shed light on the reactionary political consequences and anti-working class thrust of corruption born of middle-class aspirations and leadership pretending to speak for the oppressed, whether they were integrationists or nationalists. At the same time, he had a united front approach. He wanted to work with former members of the nation and work with anybody else he could work with, from the NAACP to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. As a matter of fact, the militant reran one of Malcolm's best speeches, in my opinion, the speech about the house Negro and the field Negro, which he gave in Selma, Alabama, which was a real contribution to steeling the young people who were going to go into the fight. You've all probably heard about what he said about the house Negro and the field Negro. Malcolm said, well, I'm a field Negro. The house Negro You know, the type of person when the master's house catches on fire, you know, he says, our house is on fire. When the master catches a cold, he says, oh, we got a cold, boss. You know, or when any bad luck happens to the master, it's we. Malcolm said, no, field Negro, when the master house catches on fire, he prays for it to burn down. You know, when the catches a cold, he prays for him to get pneumonia and die. You know, that's the kind of person he is. It represented the fact that what you had to be was somebody who understood what class you belonged to, understood there was an enemy, and that you had to fight intransigently against that enemy. And that's what he was for. This evolution on his part accelerated during the last year of his life towards more and more secular political organization, towards an anti-capitalist approach, and to him becoming a socialist in his thinking. It placed him on a trajectory that converged with that of revolutionaries and communists worldwide. It's during this period that he deepened his relationships with Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara. You know, his working relationship with the Cuban Revolution. You know, he deepened his working relationship with socialists and communists in the United States. He deepened his relationship with Ahmed Ben Bella and other liberation fighters who came out of the socialist and communist movements in Africa. He publicly spoke more and more about the need to get rid of this system. And he rejected the idea, you know, that somehow or other black nationalism was a solution. He pointed out in an interview with the Young Socialists, you know, the author of the pamphlet I was talking about before was the leader of the Young Socialists, he and the Young Socialist Alliance, they asked him, well, what do you think about black nationalism? He pointed out to them, well, I haven't been using the term recently because I no longer think it's a solution. This is a problem that that people, working people confront in the entire world, and that, you know, we have to find a different solution was basically what he told them. And that you have to explain it that way as well so you don't alienate people. Now, there's one other thing that is important for us to take a look at too, and that is that a lot of middle-class misleaders try to drape themselves in the mantle of Malcolm X in order to mislead us. One of the distortions that people like to put forward is that in the last year of his life, there was an evolution on Malcolm's part towards the ideas of Martin Luther King. There was a kind of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King convergence. Well, that is not true. Not that Martin Luther King and the SCLC didn't make a tremendous and huge and courageous contribution to the mass movement for civil rights, and not as though they weren't on the front lines of that. Yes, they were. But there was an element to the strategy that King put forward that limited unnecessarily the effectiveness of the struggle that was going on in the 1960s. And that is the subordination of the struggle at times to the necessity of Democratic Party politicians to get elected. One good example, I grew up in Detroit, and I've seen flyers about this. In 1963, there was the Freedom Now Party in Detroit, an independent black party, which really means it was an independent party of workers who happened to be black, because, you know, there were no bourgeois blacks in the Freedom Now Party, right? It was an independent black working class party that was fighting for black rights and fighting along for all other kinds of workers' demands. They were running in the election. The leadership of the United Auto Workers, which is located in Detroit, was and is today, totally tied to the Democratic Party machine. They brought King in and had him give speeches to undercut the Freedom Now Party. They put out a leaflet that, with King's picture on it, that said, I have never, you know, I do not now, and I have never advocated an all-Negro party. This was 1963 when that was the word that African Americans called ourselves. And he said, make it emphatic, vote straight Democratic. That was the leaflet. Now, the same year, Malcolm X campaigned against any kind of vote for, you know, Johnson, and explained why voting for the Democrats is like voting, it's the same as voting for the Republicans, basically. One is the fox, one is the wolf, and either way, you're going to get eaten up. That's what he said. You know? What Pansy Edwards just told you here, why she's not going to vote for any of these people. That's Malcolm X. The other is Martin Luther King. So there wasn't a political convergence like that. Malcolm, if you look at him really, is an example of the kind of working class leader, the kind of revolutionary leader that workers in the United States are capable of producing. He came from, a working class background. He came from the bottom up. But he became known on the world scale as an intransigent revolutionary leader and respected for that because of his consistency and his refusal to subordinate the struggle of his people and his class, to the needs of the bourgeoisie, of the ruling class. He fought hard and consistently for that. Now, as I said before, the op-ed piece that his daughter wrote, is very interesting. Everybody, I would advocate that everybody read it. But she says one thing here that I think is incorrect. And that is that she points to the fact that in the last 50 years, African Americans have been able to win elections and work inside the system. And she said he would encourage activists to take advantage of this success, to take power inside the system as well as outside. Well, I don't think that's what Malcolm's view was. He said all the time that it was the system itself that was the problem, and that we had to change the system, and that the way to change the system was by making a revolution. He explained what he meant by revolution. He pointed to the revolutions of the world that had changed the system, changed capitalism, to the Chinese Revolution, to the Russian Revolution, to the Cuban Revolution, to the revolution going on in the Congo, to all the anti-colonial revolutions that were taking place. That's what he meant. He never changed his mind on that. I don't think the fact that, the bourgeoisie of the United States, the capitalist class in this country, is smart enough to cultivate a layer of black politicians, that are very useful to them in times of crisis, would have changed his mind about that. No, because he knew that the system was corrupt, it was an oppressive, exploitative system, and that it could never yield the emancipation of working people or the liberation of black people. As he put it, chicken can't lay a duck egg. That's how he put it. If Malcolm were around today, he would do many of the things his daughter said he would. But I think he would be someone campaigning for the freedom, or who would have been campaigning for the freedom of the Cuban Five. 5 revolutionaries from Cuba who took an internationalist assignment to come to the United States and keep tab on counter-revolutionary thugs, counter-revolutionary terrorists, who carried out counter-revolutionary activity in Cuba, murdering people in Cuba and in the United States and Canada and Puerto Rico, who supported the Cuban Revolution. They came to the United States, gathered information on these terrorist groups, and helped the Cuban government thwart these attempts. They are all back in Cuba now. It's a big victory that's been won by working people. Anybody who wants to read about their case, can pick this book up at the table in the back. Malcolm would also be fighting. There's another editorial in the Times today, right opposite the editorial op-ed piece by Malcolm's daughter. There's an editorial, and many of you probably heard about it, where the Times is trying to one-up Walmart on Walmart's commitment to raise wages for Walmart workers to at least $9 an hour. That's a big victory, Yeah, I mean that's something that's something that we should all know. And Walmart is not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts and their consciousness. Why are they doing it? They're doing it because they feel the heat. And more than likely, McDonald's and these others, where young working people, overwhelmingly, black and, in composition, have been leading a fight to raise the minimum wage. This is having an impact. Malcolm would have been in the forefront of that fight, wouldn't he? Isn't that one of the biggest affirmative action measures that can be taken to raise the standard of living of people of African descent and other people of color in the United States by raising the minimum wage? He would have been in the forefront of that fight. And the Times, demagogically says, well, the minimum wage should be at least between $11 to $18 an hour. I think, well, this is great, 15 in the union, let's say 18 in the union. The Times says 18, whatever. But the point is that the Times, is reflecting something that's very real, that's going on in the ruling class in the United States. They're recognizing that this is a movement that is gaining some steam, is gaining power, and Walmart and the others that are raising the wage are just trying to head this off. But it means that they're scared of us, doesn't it? That's something we should take note of. Malcolm would be supporting the lawsuit by residents of Ferguson and Jennings against the system of, what do they call it, making the rounds or something like that, where people get a traffic ticket in one of these little municipalities north of St. Louis, and then they get a warrant, and then they get sent to jail and fined, they just keep amassing all kinds of fines. And then as soon as you pay the fine in one municipality, they send you to the next one so that they can do the same process over and over and over again. It's a form of debtor's jail. But there's two class action suits, one filed by residents of Jennings and one filed by residents of Ferguson, against this, which is an important step. And there's a discussion going on in the Missouri ruling class about changing the entire legal system in these north suburbs, because this is something that's that's not just an embarrassment, but it's a real something that's a real irritant. You can't hold a job if you're in jail for week after week after week. How are you going to pay these fines? And they know this is a source. This was one of the things that was an irritant that came to the fore. When people started protesting against the killing of Mike Brown and demanding the prosecution of Darren Wilson. So, but it's again, they're taking heed. See, they're listening. They pretend they don't listen to us when we speak or when we demonstrate, but they do. Malcolm would be walking the picket line in Whiting or Texas or Los Angeles with the oil workers and pointing out why this strike is so important. It's the first time in 30 years that these oil workers have been on strike. It's a fight around one of the most important things. The center of the fight is one of the most important things that working people are fighting today. In this particular fight, in the rail unions, and in many others, and that is safety. See, that's the question of safety. No sooner do these guys, less than 2 weeks after they go out on strike, then an oil refinery in Torrance blows up, right? So it's really obvious what we need. Malcolm would be explaining to people why Cuba and why the Cuban volunteers who are fighting Ebola in West Africa, in Sierra Leone especially, are setting an example for the world. For a few weeks, Ebola was on the front pages of the newspapers in the United States. But when was the last time you read an article about Ebola in the Sun-Times or the Tribune? Well, the Cubans are there because, it's still a problem. It's still a problem. There's an article in this week's issue of the Militant newspaper that contains an interview with some of the Cuban volunteers, one who got sick and, with Ebola, was cured and went back to fulfill the mission, and they're still there. Why? Because it's an important human problem. Malcolm would be in the forefront of explaining that to people and encouraging, medical professionals in the United States to go join the Cubans, do what should be done. He would be standing with the workers of Ukraine, shoulder to shoulder with these workers who are fighting against the Russian violations of their country's sovereignty, annexation of territory, and against austerity in their country. In short, he'd be trying to do what he did, during the last year of his life, build a revolutionary movement, an international revolutionary movement that's capable of taking on the ruling class in the United States and their counterparts in every single country of the world, so we can finally organize and build a world that is worthy of human beings. It's only the working class, that's going to do it. That's what he'd be doing. It's along those lines, if we keep those things in mind, we'll find the right tactics, right way to fight. Now, if you think that what I've been saying was interesting, you want to read more about it, it's all in this book, and more, including the history of the vanguard role of workers who are black in every single social movement of any importance in the United States. It's called Malcolm X, Black Liberation, the Road to Workers' Power, and it's on that table there. One of I'd just like to conclude by saying that the one historical fact that we should remember is that between the slave uprisings that took place in the United States and the civil rights movement was a long period, and a period that begins with the Civil War in the United States, which is a war that's only won when Lincoln makes the revolutionary decision to arm free blacks in the North and slaves who had been freed by the Union Army or who had fled to go back and fight Massa. That is when the Civil War became a revolutionary war and when the North began to win. Black soldiers fought, and it stands to reason they were going to fight a little bit harder, with a little bit more tenacity, and a little bit more at stake. Lincoln took advantage of this wisely. That's what won the war. Following that, there was a whole period where new governments were formed throughout the South, and where black former slaves were in government in many parts of the South, along with poor white farmers. And it was seeing the potential of this development, as well as similar developments in the cities, that led the U.S. ruling class to withdraw the troops from the South, to allow the Ku Klux Klan and other rightist organizations to smash the Reconstruction governments, and to deal working people and black people in the United States one of the biggest blows we've been dealt in history. It took 70, 80 years, to reverse that in the civil rights movement and to smash Jim Crow. And that has opened up new possibilities for us, new possibilities for unity of working people, to fight together, on the picket line, in the fight against cop brutality, in the fight for black rights, in the fight for women's rights, has strengthened us. Malcolm pointed that out. He pointed out that's where that was headed, and he would be one of the keenest minds at figuring out how to take advantage of that to the fullest through mobilizing our power on the picket line, in the streets, where we have power and they don't today, if he were alive today. That's where I disagree with his daughter. Just that one point, small point.
So now we'll hear from Mike Siviwe Elliott, who's going to talk about CPAC and the strike that's going on in Whiting, Indiana, and then we're going to open up the floor for discussion.
Yes, and Brother Andy Winger is going to moderate the discussion. So I'm Mike Siviwe Elliott. I'm with the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, and I'm also with the United Auto Workers Local 551. So my task is to talk about CPAC, which is an acronym for Civilian Police Accountability Council, and also to talk about the strike that's going on right now, where people are walking the picket line in Whiting, Indiana. against BP oil. So, where did Pansy go? I wanted to say that my heart goes out to Pansy and the family and all of the mothers and families that are going through that experience. And believe me, it's a bunch of families experiencing that exact same thing right now. I met with a mother last night whose son was killed in October, and she still hasn't received a police report. They're still blocking her from getting a copy of the autopsy. And this is the norm in the city of Chicago. This is how the police state operates in the city of Chicago. And it's one of the urgent reasons why we need a democratically elected Civilian Police Accountability Council. Karen Lewis, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, she just recently made a speech. It was her first speech since coming back from her illness. And in it, she said that a just Chicago would have a democratically elected Civilian Police Accountability Council. So people are beginning to recognize that these police have to be held accountable. And this proposed ordinance, please pick up a copy of it, it's on the table. And also we have a petition going around to support it. We have over 10,000 signatures so far, but we're trying to get up to 100,000 signatures. But what CPAC would do would be to replace the Police Review Board and the Independent Police Review Authority, which is called IPRA. So the Police Review Board and IPRA, all of its members are handpicked by the mayor of Chicago. The mayor places every single person in those bodies, on those bodies, as his personal choice. And each one of them are related in some kind of way to law enforcement. So they will never find a cop guilty of anything. It'll be extremely rare when a cop is found guilty in the city of Chicago about misconduct, particularly in the black community or in communities of color. So the need for this ordinance is urgent. We currently have about 8 aldermen who will back the ordinance, but that's not nearly enough. With the reparations ordinance that's being held up that Ashland spoke about earlier, they have 28 aldermen already on board to support it. It's 50 aldermen. They have 28 already on board, but it's being blocked in the finance committee so that it can't get voted on. So we really need to put pressure on the city council to force it out of the finance committee headed by Ed Burke onto the floor, to the city council floor, so it can be voted on. And so those victims of police torture under John Burge will get reparations, the reparations they deserve. But back to CPAC. So CPAC will replace those 2 bodies, Police Review Board and their investigative body. So if something happens to you in the city of Chicago and you want to file a complaint against the police, you file it with IPRA. Now, IPRA is supposed to investigate your complaint. But in many cases, IPRA will make you feel like you're doing the wrong thing. We've had a number of people explain to us how they've been insulted by the folks that took their complaints, and how it's been indicated that they really shouldn't follow it up and things like that. So IPRA is not serving the people of this city. And it was actually created to replace the Office of Police Standards, which was found to be totally ineffective. So they renamed it IPRA, the Independent Police Review Authority. They renamed it, and it still is just as ineffective as ever. So with CPAC, the members of CPAC will be elected democratically throughout the city of Chicago in every police district. It's 26 police districts. And there'll be offices in each district where people can file their complaints directly to the elected officials. And these, the people in IPRO will have the power to determine who the police chief is. They have the power to call for federal investigations. They have the power to rewrite the rule books under which the police operate in our community. It will be able to establish the rules and regulations on how they conduct themselves in our community. It will hold police who witness other police committing crimes with being accessories to those crimes. Because you know, the Blue Code of Silence, they don't rat on any police no matter what they do. That the Code of Silence is in full effect in the city of Chicago. And in the city of Chicago itself, where we must stop this, we must be able to hold the police accountable. There's a long, long history of torture, brutality, and murder. If you really don't understand, and it's hard for people to understand when they first hear about it, it's almost like that couldn't be possible. But the United Nations has declared that what goes on in Chicago as a violation of human rights. The United Nations has recognized that. We Charge Genocide, a group of youth went to the United Nations. Brother Todd was one of them. Raise your hand, Brother Todd. He was one of the people that went to the United Nations to file a complaint against the Chicago Police Department for its brutality and its unprecedented mistreatment, torture, and murder of black and brown people in the city of Chicago. And the United Nations responded by criticizing the United States government for not having dealt with that after all these years of complaints. There's been multiple complaints in the United Nations about the Chicago police. The Chicago police are notorious. And I hope one of you are in here so you can take this back to your supervisors or your bosses. I mean, it's been proven over and over again, and just recently in the paper, they found that one of the leading torturers in Guantanamo was a former Chicago policeman. And he came to Guantanamo using the tactics that he learned in Chicago on prisoners from the Middle East. That's how notorious Chicago is. As we stand here today, Chicago has one of the most brutal police forces probably in the world, equal to South Africa's back when the apartheid government was in effect. And I'm sure they trained some of those apartheid police when they used to torture black prisoners. So it's so urgent that we take this very seriously and get on board to back this legislation. You can learn much more about it if you go to stoppolicecrimes.com. Stoppolicecrimes.com. And you can find out much more and get further into the details about this ordinance. And this year, we are, as we move on through this year, this ordinance has the support of many, many people and organizations. Angela Davis and Howard Morgan, who was recently released from prison after being shot 28 times by the Chicago police and lived somehow. He signed on to supporting this ordinance because he recognizes that we have to develop something to hold the police accountable. Because the police feel totally free to do what they want to do with any of our bodies. But they mostly focus on black, poor, and brown communities. And why is that? A lot of it has to do with racism, straight up racism. And what is this racism? This racism, somebody once said racism, wherever it is, it has the stench of slavery. That means that the races that we encounter today that carry guns they are generational races. This racism was passed on. They were raised to hate us. And many of the whites in this room today, I'm sure they understand in many cases where there's been times in your families where there's been racist things said and indications that you are better than black people. And so this thing, it grows and it passes on from generation to generation. And we see that. We see that in the hate in cops' eyes. And this is on a daily basis. And so even at my age, you know, they look at me at the same hate that they look at my teenage brothers and sisters with. It doesn't matter what your age is. If you're black, they don't consider you as a human being. So they can beat you, they can torture you, they won't feel any guilt because you're not even a human. You're an animal. And they'll call you an animal. And they use those terms daily. Animals, they call us animals and all kinds of things related to animals. And that's exactly because it expresses how they feel about us. And so this racism and this hate that flourishes among the Chicago Police Department is a very real thing. And, families like Dakota Bright's family, they know it more than anybody else. And we work, in my organizations, we work with families that have experienced that. And we try to help them get justice. And so, we're very clear that, this is something that has to be dealt with. So, this ordinance, CPAC, the Civilian Police Accountability Council, is not an end all. We know that. But it's a step toward holding the police accountable that has never happened before. There have been some other cities that have tried it. But we mean to add some real teeth into this legislation with the backing of the people of Chicago and with the mass support. We can make it happen. So I encourage everyone to please pick up the pamphlet, go to stoppolicecrimes.com, sign the petition that's going around. We want to have up to 100,000 people by August of this year. And on August 29th, we're going to have a major national demonstration in the city of Chicago calling for the establishment of CPAC. And people will be coming from all around the nation to attend it. And people all around the nation are looking at the model that was developed here to implement in their own cities. St. Louis is looking at it right now as they're discussing it in their city council. There are people pushing to establish this. Just like this, with replacing the name Chicago with St. Louis on it. So other cities, New York, Memphis, and other areas of the country are seriously looking at this legislation because it's a need to hold the police accountable. All the protests and demonstrations just continue. After each killing, there's a protest, there's a demonstration, then another one, and another one. But we need a structure to hold them accountable finally. And that's what CPAC does, and we hope that we can get your support on it. It's going to help everybody. With that said, I'm going to briefly talk about what's going on in Whiting, Indiana, where British Petroleum Oil has forced the workers there to go on strike. They're all members of United Steelworkers, and their lives are literally on the line. So it's about 6,000 workers on strike right now at 11 different facilities. The United Steelworkers have about 30,000 members, and there's over 200 different oil refineries, pipelines, and terminals that these workers work on a daily basis. And so right now it's only 6,000, but we think it's going to continue to spread. And if it does, it will affect 64% of all oil production in the United States. So that's going to have a devastating impact on this nation. And the reason why these workers are having so much difficulty and were forced to go on strike is because the oil companies have given Shell Oil the authority to negotiate for them. Shell Oil is one of the most notorious oil companies, corporations in the world. They have backed the most brutal regimes all around the world and supplied each of those regimes, armies and police, with oil and gasoline. That's what Shell Oil does. That's what they're doing right now in Nigeria, in other countries. And so these are the people that are negotiating with the United Steelworkers. And they're going to make it very difficult for them, the steelworkers, to get justice during this strike. And fortunately, because of the atmosphere created by the Black Lives Matter movement, which has changed so much in this country, which has impacted so many people in this country, that United Steelworkers and others are now more encouraged to rebel against injustice. And other unions have also joined them on the picket line. My union, United Auto Workers, Local 551, we've joined them on the picket line. The teachers' unions have joined them. Other unions are joining them on the picket line. And I encourage all of you, if you get a chance, to go down to Whiting to join that picket line. They'll treat you like you're a brother or sister and be glad that you're out there supporting them. Because they out in the coldest weather, they're out there marching around, holding their picket lines, fighting for their rights, which is, and what they're really facing is, like the brother said, is some major safety issues. There's explosions going on, there's leaking pipes, there's all kind of unsafe working conditions that these workers have to face. And so they decided to rebel against that. And with our support, they can continue to keep this struggle going and win the rights that they're fighting for. I have no doubt that they'll win because of the support that's building for them. But we have to understand who we're fighting. You know, people like Shell Oil, they represent that 1% more than anybody. And they have proven throughout time to be supportive of dictators and any brutal regime that exists. If they can supply them with oil for their armies or their police, they'll do it without losing a minute of sleep. So, it's important that we understand that we're all struggling against this power structure which values profits over people no matter what. Profits are the number one concern of the corporations that are running this country. And they run this country. And the politicians work for them. And we have to be clear on that. So I want to wrap this up by saying that Malcolm X would have been extremely proud of the Black Lives Matter movement. He would have been extremely proud. I remember Malcolm X once said, students are the ones that bring about a change. So he was always about recognizing the power of the youth and pushing the youth to understand the power that they have. And to actually see it take the formation that it has now, today, under the Black Lives Matter banner, is something that he would be extremely proud about. And the level of militancy and determination and clearness on their focus is something that we all should be proud about, and we all should be joining in to support. And I think the majority of this people in this room do support that. And so we have to continue to do that if we're going to be successful in changing this country around. So I just want to close with that and thank you for being here. Thank you.
So now we're going to open up the floor for discussion. Andy's going to help me facilitate that. So we want to hear from everyone in the room. We want to get your thoughts on some of what has been said, thoughts on what has not been said. We want to know what you guys know about Malcolm and how you see his legacy as being impactful today. So.
Yeah, and so, people want to talk, you can just raise your hand, I'll call on you, and if I'm going to try and call on folks who haven't spoken before I call on someone to repeat, speaking. And, I just want to, again, what Aislinn was saying, frame the discussion around whatever you find necessary, but Malcolm X's political legacy, but also the fight now. We have a real fight, we have a family that came here talking about their son was murdered by the police. This is real life people losing people towards them. It's my contention that we need to build a movement of ordinary people to fight this and hold the system accountable and move towards us having power over our community. But the idea now is, what do folks think? I'm just putting that out there to get people's minds going on whatever, but we just want to open it up to discussion, and feel free to speak on whatever you like, but try to hold your comments, I guess, to 2 minutes or something around that.
And then again, we just want to thank Pansy for coming. They already had plans for the day, but she felt it was important, so she came in. I just really want to thank you and all of
Questions, comments?
Yes.
Well, Malcolm X was assassinated before some of the big struggles, that took place, that even many people in this room didn't get to participate in because you were too young. But the struggle against the Vietnam War, the beginning of the fight for women's rights, around the question of a woman's right to choose, and the Equal Rights Amendment and affirmative action, the beginning of affirmative action, which made it possible for women and oppressed nationalities to get jobs in the steel mills and the auto mills, auto factories and the oil refineries and the coal mines. And both of the speakers talked about how there's been an increase in struggles recently, in the last couple of years even, with the fight of the Walmart workers and the fast food workers for $15 minimum wage and a union and full-time work, and with the slight uptick in strikes and union fights like the one at the oil refineries today, and and on the railroads. And so I was wondering what the speakers thought about, you know, what the future will bring us. You know, can we expect more? I think that all of these fights reinforce each other. I think that the fight against police brutality is reinforced by the fight for a decent minimum wage. I think the fight for a decent minimum wage is inspired by strikes like the one of refinery workers, where refinery workers are paid a lot of money, but they put their lives on the line, like the speaker said. And so this strike is around safety, not around wages. That's what they say. And so, you know, is this going to continue? And what exactly is the driving force behind the increase that we're seeing in struggles today?
Okay, thank you. We're going to take some more comments and questions and then allow speakers to answer. And back there.
Hi, I'm Erica, and I'm with the Spartacus League, which is a revolutionary Marxist organization. And we publish Workers' Vanguard newspaper. And, you know, we fight for Black liberation through socialist revolution. And it is really through socialist revolution, a real workers' revolution, that we will finally avenge the deaths of people like Dakota Bright, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Mike Brown. And in this country, we fight for a revolutionary workers' party to sweep away the capitalist system. And we seek to win workers and youth to the fight for socialist revolution in this country and also worldwide. You know, and we were, Mike Elliott was talking about, you know, the BP oil strike that's going on. And we do intervene into social struggles and have sewed and supported those picketers and call for victory to the oil workers' strike and a shutdown for all the refineries and the picket lines and you don't cross. And in regards to some of the protests, you know, that have happened from Ferguson to New York against Eric Garner, et cetera, you know, we recognize that police reform is a hustle and that racist cop terror, you know, can't be stopped through things like civilian review boards or, you know, begging, you know, the cops to be a little less racist or, you know, act nicer. The truth of the matter is the cops are your class enemy, as are, you know, all of the capitalist parties, the Democrats, the Greens, the Republicans, etc. But, you know, key to winning, you know, workers to the understanding, you know, of the need to fight for socialist revolution in this country are squarely confronting these kinds of obstacles, illusions in the Democratic Party, you know, illusions in the reformability of the police, and to understand that, you know, the social power lies, they have the unique social power to overthrow this capitalist system. And you know, part of those illusions also, you know, I guess I have to take issue with what the SWP speaker said about Malcolm X in regards to the Ukraine. Now, I kind of would think that Malcolm X would find that a bit of a slander, being that he, you know, spoke out against capitalist parties, you know, such as the Democrats and Republicans. And I say this because the U.S., it's U.S. imperialism that's backing the fascist-led regime in Kiev. And, you know, we have a side against the U.S. imperialists in this fight. And, you know, we called for self-determination in the East Ukraine. And, you know, we said that Crimea was Russian and supported the right to annex, you know, with Russia. However, this is not the first time, you know.
Can you kind of try to wrap up this?
Sure. And this is just not the first time, though, you know, that, you know, the SWP has diverged, you know, from Malcolm X. So, you know, one example is when JFK died, Malcolm X, you know, said that the chickens came home to roost, and, you know, the SWP sent condolences to Kennedy. So, you know, and one other key, you know, difference that we have, you know, with the SWP, but not not just the SWP, but, also, with what Malcolm X, held on to, which is Black nationalism. We're against all forms of nationalism. We're revolutionary internationalists and understand that winning, workers across, all countries, across all racial barriers to the understanding of the need to fight for socialist revolution is really what's key and what's necessary, to end racism, to finally, smash the cops, which
All right,
exists
thank you,
to
thank you.
uphold capitalism.
We want to have a discussion, thank you. So, anyone else?
Anyone with a question?
Krista?
Okay, first and foremost, you don't win battles against the police without going into the system of the police. You have to have police officers want to throw police officers under the bus. And that's what we did with Rekia Boyd. We had police officers throw Dante Servin under the bus. We went into the system. We used IPRA, okay? We used IPRA, we used congressmen, we used senators, we wrote letters to the U.S. Attorney's Office. We did everything that we could do within the system, and we got Dante Servin charged. So if you honestly believe that marching down the street is going to get a police officer charged, then you have to get your strategies together, okay? Because marching ain't going to do it, I'm going to tell you. We marched one time for Rekia, one time, within 2 days of her death. And the one thing that stands out most in that march is that at the very end of it, you know what we did? We prayed. We prayed, okay? And we got him taken out. But we got him taken out by working within the system. We went to the police board, and I spoke every month at the police board, telling the police board what was wrong with not charging that officer. We went through IPRA. We sent Martinez to IPRA. We had IPRA on our side. IPRA sat with the state's attorney's office every month. IPRA sits with the state's attorney's office every month on recommendations to charge police officers. They sat with them every month because every month I went to the police board and told them, you need to be talking about Rekia. You don't ask the Chicago police for autopsy reports. You FOIA them. Okay, you do a Freedom of Information Act and you FOIA that police report and you FOIA that autopsy report. If you can't get a civil rights lawyer to get it through the civil case. We got Rekia's because there was a civil case. And when her mother got it, she was totally amazed. Dakota was shot in his head. And what's her name, Pansy? Pansy said that the gun was found somewhere else. That's because it was in the backyard. When they shot him in his head, he was running through the park. And they did shoot him in the back of his head. There was no saving Dakota. There was no saving Dakota. Dakota was dead. The problem that I have with the whole Dakota Bright incident is that police officers will run up to a body and handcuff it. Now, I don't know how that body looked and how he fell on the ground because you've already messed with evidence. So first and foremost, you have to understand that unless you're working in the system, unless you have police officers that are willing to throw police officers under the bus, you're not going to get anywhere with marching on the street. Have a strategy and work your strategy. Get congressmen, senators, aldermen, all these different people, get them on your side. Okay, so that's one. Two, Malcolm X. Malcolm X changed as he got older. He didn't stay the same. So to say what Malcolm X would be doing right now, you don't know. Okay, you don't know it all. But I can tell you he'd be marching on the street with us. He would be marching on the street with us, but we don't know what he would have been doing politically. Because when I look at everything that Malcolm has done, what I can say is that he was brilliant, he was wonderful, he was witty, he was fun to listen to, but I don't remember the marches that Malcolm led. I remember the marches that King led, and I remember the 1964 Voting Rights Act that King got in place. So let's not misunderstand that these two people weren't on different sides of the fence. They were fighting for the same thing. They were just fighting in different lanes. And they did come together. So there is no good thing, wonderful, fantastic thing about Malcolm that isn't a good, wonderful, fantastic thing about Martin. The other thing is you ain't gonna get anywhere unless you come together with your Anglo brothers and sisters. All of these movements have to come together. The workers' movement, the war, the anti-war movement, the anti-police violence movement, all these movements have to come together in order to push forward any kind of legislation that we want to do. Now, we had gone to Geneva 3 times. And the CAARPR is the first one to write a report on police violence in Chicago. Yes. So don't misunderstand that it wasn't one report that came out of Chicago. It was dozens of reports that came out of Chicago that moved us forward. So let me just repeat. 1, if you want to get a police officer taken down, you got to throw him under the bus and you got to work within the system. Marching is not going to do it. 2, Malcolm X, we can't tell what Malcolm X would be doing right now, but we can say that he would have been on our sides when it comes to police violence and crime. I forgot what number 3 was, so I'll just say that.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to, actually, that was a really great comment, and that sums a lot of stuff up. I just wanted to say that I find it despicable that there's organizations that try to appropriate Malcolm's legacy. People say this is one nation under God, but it's not. It's many nations under a dominant white supremacist nation. One of those nations that's kept suppressed by the white nation is the black nation, right? Malcolm's legacy belongs to the black nation. It doesn't belong to this political party. It doesn't belong to that political party. Malcolm's legacy was carried out after his death by organizations like the Black Panther Party, by the Black Liberation Army, by the Republic of New Africa, by organizations like that who were smashed by force by the white supremacist state. Okay, his legacy belongs to the black nation, and I find it despicable. I'm not going to be able to avoid naming names, but the SWP actually dragged Betty Shabazz into court over the rights to her speeches. That is not the way a so-called socialist organization should conduct itself. He's not any one group's property. You know what I mean? Malcolm X was a revolutionary nationalist. He was not evolving away from that position. You cannot tell me that he was evolving into a socialist. He was a revolutionary nationalist in response to national oppression. And no organization that's predominantly white can tell black people what sort of tactics to pursue to free themselves. It is not their business. Their business is to support those struggles, whatever form they may take. So, and for identification purposes, my name is Eric Struckman with ATU Local 241 and Workers' World Party.
Anybody else before we get comments? Essence.
I don't know what I should say, but thank you everybody for your comments, and I really appreciate this event today because I definitely think we should definitely honor Malcolm X's legacy in the most positive ways possible. So I noticed that, within the movement, there are so many different agendas. There's so many different ideas about how people should go forth and create the change that in the communities against police violence. And I would love for the panelists and also specifically you too, Aislinn, to talk about how the Black Lives Matter movement has been collaborative and how it kind of, if it does, incorporate the different agendas in a way that makes a more powerful collective movement. And also to you too.
Maybe we can get Todd and then we'll hear from everyone.
Word. So yeah, I think I'm gonna sit down because I like seeing. I think folks Essence, sorry. and other folks have spoken really well to like the question of how the Black Lives Matter movement gained so much steam, or gained the steam that it has, and I think it's because of the collaborative efforts and the movement's sort of understanding of the roots of these oppressions, whether it be the question in Palestine, whether it be the question on police and the fight for Black liberation, all of these things. Like it was like it was a collaborative effort that brought out folks for the Reclaim MLK March. It was folks from SJP and doing Ayatanapa Solidarity work that saw the connections between our struggles and to state violence and things of that nature, and the militarization of law enforcement, and like the pervasiveness of imperialism. In terms of like, even in student organizations, right? Up in Northwestern University, it was Black student organizations, Latino student organizations, and SJP that got the entire student body to approve divestment from Palestine, right? We see the connections between companies like G4S, who opens prisons to lock up Palestinians in Gaza, and is also trying to open up a prison in Illinois to lock up predominantly Black and brown bodies. And I think like in terms of like electoral politics and things of that nature, we absolutely need to fight for independent political candidates who are held accountable, come from a struggle from the people, and come from organizations that could hold them accountable. I mean, when you think of like a candidate like Olga Batista on the South Side, who is an activist fighting against pet coke being dumped in predominantly communities of color, and who actually won that, right? Like, they're not good. They're taking pet coke out of those communities, right? And that's from somebody who like stuck to their guns and campaigned on the need for the community to be to wipe out like pet coke from there. So like I think the great thing about the Black Lives Matter movement is an understanding of shared struggle, and that needs to continue in order to like build organizational political power in order to take over the system.
Yeah, I just on that note that was brought up about the actual Black Lives Matter movement now and so forth, like I think it's an important thing that folks are bringing up to broaden the struggle, you know, to organize a mass movement and so forth. So like, if I just want to put out, if people are interested in being a part of building that type of organization that can push that movement forward, like make sure you sign the sign-up sheet and so forth, so that people can be in contact with each other and work towards that common struggle. So I just want to put that out there.
And I also want to shout out Netta in the back. Sorry, Netta, I'm shouting you out. Just raise your hand. Netta is here, transplant from St. Louis. She's been on the ground since August 9th in Ferguson. And Netta is one of the people who helped report and spread the word out about what was happening in Ferguson before news, major news networks went there. A lot of what happened because of Netta and people like Netta who were doing the on-the-ground reporting. Netta's been pepper sprayed, shot with rubber bullets, the whole nine. Met with, and Netta really, hopefully, will speak to the experience of what now is being coined the Black Lives Matter movement, but of working with multiple organizations, sometimes with competing agendas, sometimes knockout fights, that have occurred. And it's hard work. And, we can even just hear from the comments within the audience, it's hard work that has to be done. But ultimately, I'm invested in, ending Black oppression, and I'm willing to work with anyone who is committed to that. So on that end, we can let the panelists respond.